Hi, this is Lena here again, and I'm a horticulturist specializing in residential gardening. I saw some of you watched my first video about winter plant care. So this time I'm going to talk to you about pruning for flowers. But one thing you're thinking about when you're pruning for blooms is to make sure that you're pruning in a way that's appropriate to the species. Most deciduous plants that we think of, trees, shrubs, are actually flowering plants. The technical term for it is angiosperms, and they're differentiated from other perennial plants that we commonly refer to as conifers. Those are gymnosperms. So with all angiosperms, basically what the technical term means is that they produce flowers. When we're pruning our shrubs and trees in the landscape, we're trying to, for our own selfish purposes, encourage flowering. So there's two main purposes for pruning, as I mentioned. One is for aesthetic purposes, and the second one is for plant health. So say you have a rose. The rose will grow leaves in the spring. It'll develop flower buds. The flowers will bloom. So you have your rose flower. After the flower starts browning and kind of dying off, what you can do is cut that flower off and discard of it, put it in your compost pile or into your yard waste bag. And what that'll do is it'll stop the plant's natural life cycle, which is to go from leaf to flower to fruit. It's really good for the health of the plant too, because what happens when a plant goes into fruit production, so for a rose, when the rose gets pollinated and goes into becoming a rose hip, in that stage of life, the plant is putting all of its energy into creating a nice, good fruit that will be likely to be, say, eaten by a bird and the bird will go and poop it out somewhere, and then the new plant will grow. So by cutting the flower off, you're putting the plant back into flower producing mode. So as opposed to trying to put all its energy to producing this one nice, really good fruit that'll continue its life, it focuses on producing really beautiful flowers that'll get noticed by the birds and the pollinators and by you. So in order to illustrate my point about pruning for flowers, I'm going to talk about two different kinds of hydrangeas that I have here in dried form because it's winter here, but thankfully I had these lying around. So the first kind that I'll talk about here, this is a Panicle Hydrangea. The Latin name is Hydrangea paniculata. The reason it's called a Panicle Hydrangea is, if you can see, the flower isn't kind of like a cone shape, right? So that's a plant that you'll commonly find in ornamental landscape plantings here around Toronto. They are hardy to our zone, so our zone is zone 5. They're definitely hardy to that. The other type of hydrangea that we're going to talk about is called the tree hydrangea. They also can sometimes be commonly referred to as an Annabelle hydrangea. But Annabelle is just a type of tree hydrangea. So the Latin name is Hydrangea arborescens. Hi, this is Editing Lena here, just with a quick disclaimer on using common names for plants. You'll notice in the video, starting here and for the rest of it, I refer to Hydrangea arborescens as the tree hydrangea, which is my common name for it. However, upon further research, it is not so common in the public sphere. But since I use the Latin name, Hydrangea arborescens, you'll know from now on that whenever I say tree hydrangea, I am in fact referring to that species. A more used common name is smooth hydrangea or Annabelle hydrangea, like I mentioned in the video. Again, sorry for the confusion, but hopefully this will spur another video about why it's important to know the Latin name of the plant you're referring to. And you'll notice in the species name arborescens, there's the word arbor, which of course means tree. So there, in another video, I'll talk to you about Latin names and how we can really learn a lot about plants by learning about their names. The tree hydrangea is also hardy to our zone. I think it's hardy up to zone 3. Both of these hydrangeas will survive in our area and will continue flowering. I'll take this opportunity to mention one more hydrangea, and I don't have an example of it in flower. The reason being is because it doesn't flower in our climate, and these are called big leaf hydrangea, the Latin name Hydrangea macrophylla, macro meaning large and phyllo meaning leaf. After you buy them from the nursery, they look gorgeous. Those are the plants you see in the spring and early summer. They're like blue and purple, and they're these little cute shrubs, and they're just stunning, and people buy them and they put them in the ground. And what happens is they're not quite hardy to our area. They're barely zone 5. Some of them I think are closer to zone 6, meaning that their flower buds are not gonna survive the winter, whereas these ones will. So if you are buying a hydrangea and you're in Toronto, which is zone 5, which means we have winters that reach minus 30 degrees Celsius. So if you are buying a hydrangea, I definitely would recommend taking a look at either the tree hydrangea or the panicle hydrangea, because those are the ones that will be more likely to really thrive in your garden. Avoid the big leaf hydrangea because they are very unlikely to survive year after year and give you beautiful blooms like these would. So let's talk about pruning. The tree hydrangea, Hydrangea arborescens. So when you're pruning, it's important to take note of where the buds are. The buds of the tree hydrangea. There are these two little knobs. They're arranged opposite each other. From these buds, you'll have leaves growing. They won't be falling off like that when it's alive. And then also, you'll have the stem to produce the flower as well. So with this hydrangea, when you're thinking about pruning for flowering, you have to remember that it blooms on old wood and new wood. What does that mean? Because we have a shrub like a hydrangea that grows year after year, some of the wood will be old wood. It's wood that's grown last year. So say it's 2020. I'm looking at this shrub in 2020. This wood grew in 2019. So it will produce stems that'll produce flowers. And then it also blooms on new wood. And what that means is that this is wood that grew in 2020. So I'm looking at this plant 2020, and there's a new branch here, and lo and behold, there's a flower on it. So with this kind of hydrangea, because it blooms on new and old wood, there's two basic ways of pruning it. One method has you prune the hydrangea all the way to the first buds, first or second buds in the ground, from the ground. So say if this is the earth here, and I want to prune the first method, I would prune it just right above the buds there. So what this will do is in the spring is it'll have these little stems come out and bloom really beautiful big flowers. There is a second method of pruning these hydrangeas because they bloom on both old and new wood. Is your other option, which I am an advocate for, and I'll tell you why in a minute. I can keep some of this older growth, being confident that they will produce flowers as they have on this one, and just prune maybe 3 to 4 buds above ground, as opposed to pruning all the way down to the ground. You'll have actually more flowers because I'm leaving more buds to bloom from. The flowers won't be as big, but by leaving more of this old wood that grew last year, you're actually helping the hydrangea support itself. One of the main maintenance tasks you'll have to be doing for a hydrangea is making sure it stays in place. So to make sure the flowers aren't falling over, breaking the stems, and or getting in your way. And especially if you're trying to save your hydrangeas for dried flowers like these ones here, if the stem breaks, it doesn't actually look preserved quite as well. So in any case, with the second method, by leaving these branches, you're helping the hydrangea support itself, so you won't have to stake it as much. So that's the pruning method for a tree hydrangea. Blooms on old and new wood. So you have two options: prune it all the way down to the ground, let it regrow, or prune it a little more cautiously, leaving some of the older growth to help it support itself. So next we'll move on to my second type of hydrangea here. It's the Panicle Hydrangea, Hydrangea paniculata. Now these hydrangeas I really love. They really respond well to pruning, and you'll see that they're sometimes trained into a tree form. So you can imagine if this stem is, in the landscape, you could have a tree hydrangea that looks basically like this, where you have a clear stem and a bunch of leaves and flowers in the top. Basically, the way it's accomplished is if you basically prune out the smaller branches and leave it with a nice straight trunk. So here we have the bud for the Panicle Hydrangea, and because the Panicle Hydrangea and the tree hydrangea are different species of the same genus, that is Hydrangea is the genus, they have that in common. Their buds are both opposite of each other. And the other thing they have in common is the structure of their flowers. So that by that I mean the individual flowers. The shape of the whole inflorescence, that is the group of flowers, will differ. The individual flowers are very similar. I mean, just this little guy here, and those will look very similar between different hydrangeas, but we can distinguish them, of course, by their flower shape and their growth type or structure. So panicle hydrangeas, as opposed to the tree hydrangeas, which bloom on old and new wood, panicle hydrangeas bloom only on new wood. You get the most and biggest flowers by pruning aggressively. What does that mean? Normally I do wait for spring to prune, just because then I can see what's alive and what's not. Say I'm looking at this next spring and I think, you know what, I want this hydrangea to bloom big, beautiful, multiple blooms. So what will I do is I will prune everything that grew last year. So here you can see how it grows out of the tip of the branch. So if I wanted to prune this in next spring for the best blooms, I am cutting this whole piece off. I'm cutting this whole piece off, again, up right above the bud, cutting this piece off. So what you end up with is a little kind of like a claw. And from that nub, once you do that in the spring, it'll grow all these big, beautiful flowers. and keeping in mind that you'll get your flowers on the new growth. Whereas with the tree hydrangea, you do have the option of keeping some of the old wood and not losing blooms. Tree hydrangeas are ironically grown to grow more like shrubs in the landscape. They won't actually be trained well into a tree. And panicle hydrangeas are trained more to grow like trees. They do have different methods of pruning. And by keeping their blooming tendencies in mind, that is whether they bloom on old or new wood, you can help encourage your plant to grow in a healthy way that's aesthetically pleasing and that reduces maintenance for you. Hopefully I've been able to help you a little bit in your gardening adventures. Keep in mind whether the plant blooms on new wood or old wood, and also keep in mind the way that the plant is likely to grow in your landscape and how it will thrive. Thank you again for watching. That was my second video. I wish you all a very happy holiday, and I hope to see you all again soon. Please like and subscribe, and if you have any questions about gardening, leave them down below. I love to talk about plants. I can talk about plants all day long. Thanks again, and take care.